Today, I share my biggest financial mistakes. So, as you guys can see, I'm riding completely solo, but I still had Daniel and crew right off air, and here's something that's very exciting. Daniel will be, setting up the questions for today's show when we go to the live stream Q&A in a second. But first, I want to start off with a little self-reflection. I want to talk about the 5 big mistakes I've made financially, and I thought the timing couldn't be better to kind of be really self-deprecating, to explain we make mistakes with content just like we do with our finances, and that's okay, because even when you make little mistakes or even somewhat moderate mistakes, you can still have tremendous success in the long term. Our most recent mistake that we've made is that we let our nerdiness show a little too much. We recently did a reprise of our superhero show. As you can see, I thought it was always so fun that it was Batman and Robin, and then Bo, I think, because he's the one that actually suggested the most recent superhero show. He said, hey, now that we have multiverse, we could both be superheroes like Spider-Man. Well, here's the thing. You guys were not that interested in it. The algorithm wasn't interested in it. We're probably going to say goodbye to this whole superhero franchise, but we made a mistake, and that's okay, because you guys let us laugh at ourselves and we'll move on. But today I kind of want to jump into my biggest money mistakes, because I think there's a lot of learning opportunity by just focusing on, hey, what did I get right? What did I get wrong? But the big setup is, if I can make this many mistakes, it shows that the window of opportunity to create success for yourself is there. So you don't have to get everything right. Let's jump right into these. The first one is missing Roth contributions. You guys know, when we even talk about this in the financial order of operations, step number 5 of the financial order of operations is that tax-free growth between your health savings accounts, your Roth IRAs. These things are tremendous for the long term because they grow completely tax-free. Yes, you don't get a contribution deduction, but they do get complete growth tax-free. That's why when we talk about $1 invested for a 21-year-old, can turn into $88 at age 66. You too can have that completely tax-free, so take advantage of this. There's a reason the government limits it. But here's the thing. I give you guys that advice, but myself, I've made mistakes and not completely maximized this great resource my entire life. And I even went back and put together the data on this. I've missed exactly $10,000 of Roth contributions since I was eligible to make these. And what's interesting to me is that they all came about in 1999 through 2003. I can understand what happened to me in 2000 through 2003, because 2000, I lost my father. That year was kind of chaotic with his sickness and everything else. From really 2001 to 2003, I was starting my business, organizing my first going out on my own as an entrepreneur business. So every dollar I had a purpose, and it was actually not funding Roth during that period. What I couldn't figure out when I was doing this research is, what the heck was I doing in 1999? My wife and I made great income. We just didn't fund our Roth IRA. But what I think is really interesting is the missed opportunity with every one of these dollars. I'm nerdy enough that I worked with a team, and we actually backed into, if you annualize the rate of return to get my Roth IRA to the size that it is now, what have I actually made per year? And we calculated it out to be 10.95%. That's pretty good. I'm actually pretty pleased with that. And it makes sense, because what do you put in Roth IRAs? These are supposed to be your growth assets. These are assets that you're counting on will have the most compounding growth, so you can stick it to our favorite taxing uncle, the biggest impact whatsoever with the compounding. So we took this a step further to see what the opportunity cost was on my Roth contributions that I missed out on. So like in 1999, that $2,000 that I failed to contribute in 1999, in today's value, meaning in 2022, would be worth $22,000. That's pretty incredible. 2000, that $1,000 I missed out on would be worth $9,800. 2001, that $2,000 would be worth right under $18,000. In 2002, 2003, you can see those numbers are between 16 and 21,000. If you added up all the missing value of the $10,000 that I failed to contribute, today they would be worth around $87,000. That's really incredible, that missed opportunity, but that's only part of the story. I still have decades before I reach 65. If you'd have let that money continue to grow, that $10,000 missed opportunity actually could have been worth $617,000 in the long term. So there's two things to learn from this. First, do not leave money on the table with these Roth contributions. You can see back in 1999 through 2001, the max you could contribute to these was $2,000 a year. So every $2,000 I could have put in had a lot of value. Now the contribution limit is over $6,000. Don't miss out on that. But here's the other takeaway, and I've shared this already. If you have failed to make contributions in the past, don't beat yourself up. Get on the bicycle and start making those contributions right now, because as you can see from my case study, you can make mistakes and still have long-term success. Just don't make those mistakes again in the future. Learn from that. Let's talk about the second big thing that I've learned over my career and mistakes I've made. Quit chasing the hot dot. Look, this is, I think we get caught up in this world now where we know that there's cryptocurrencies, there's all kind of exotic things that have come out with NFTs. There's always going to be something that's exciting out there in the investment marketplace that's being marketed, or you're seeing a lot of people that supposedly are making tons of money. I call this chasing the hot dot because it can distract you. If I had Bo sitting here with me, he would be sharing, hey, make sure you get the full financial order of operations before you start doing this speculative investing. Well, that's easy to say, hard to not implement in your own investment life. And my example that I'll share is back in 1999, when I was looking at investing, I did put some money into the internet fund. Now, the internet fund, because realize, I know now we all take for granted we have internet. Back then, this was cutting edge. And there was this internet fund that was blowing it out. I'm talking about this thing had 300% performance in very short period of time. I mean, like in 12 to 18 months, this thing made over 300%. Forbes was covering it. This thing was getting a lot of attention. I invested in this fund. I had put like $2,000 into it, watched it go over 4,000, got a lot of my friends into it. And then what I think is interesting is it's showing when you get distracted chasing the hot dot, we know trees don't grow to heaven, because look at the performance from this from 1999 to 2002. You can see that rocket ride that I experienced, but you can see when it also fell down, I enjoyed that part of the ride too. So this is the thing with distractions. Don't chase the hot dot because it gets outside of your plan, the financial order of operations, and making every dollar have a purpose. This can be very concerning and cause a lot of distractions in your financial life. So don't let somebody in the financial media or some influencer on YouTube get you away from doing index funds and making sure that every dollar has a plan within your investment. Every dollar that you have. Number 3, not having enough cash. Look, guys, I will tell you, I see this all the time right now. Cash is trash, and the fact that interest rates historically have been very low for the last few decades. Now, I know that the Federal Reserve is raising rates right now, and I'm hoping that by the end of the year, maybe cash will actually start earning something good for us. But there's a lot of people on the internet that I'm seeing them brag about the fact that they're going to reach 7-figure asset status with zero cash because they don't want cash because of how low interest rates are. I've also fallen prey to this in my journey to creating wealth. The example, and I've seen a lot of people on YouTube using this as well. With housing prices going up so much, I think a lot of people think, well, why should I keep cash? I can just have a home equity line. Because, by the way, I've heard this siren song because I did the exact same thing. I had a home equity line that had a debit card as well as a checkbook. I had 6 figures of equity. And I was like, why would I have cash? I could just let every dollar maximize and grow, and then not worry about that low interest that's on the cash. And you can see back in 2006, the bank agreed with me. I had tons of equity. In my house that I had down in Georgia at the time, was worth $510,000. What could go wrong? This is great. I don't need to keep cash. But as I've shared with you guys in the past, unfortunately, volatility is an extrovert. So it travels around with crazy, bad news with the job marketplace. The stock market will get beat up. The real estate market will get beat up. All these things will happen at the same time. They don't happen one year. They queue up the volatility in the stock market. The next year, they queue up the real estate. No, these things typically will happen all at the same time. So imagine my shock when I'm thinking my money is super safe, that I don't need cash because I can just use my home equity line and that debit card and that checkbook. And then I get this from the bank. Because remember, 2006, this house is worth $510,000. Fast forward to March 5th of 2010, Wells Fargo reaches out to me and says, hey, we think your house is only worth $273,000. We're freezing all of your access to that home equity line. It was like the music stopped. So I'm telling you, don't get caught without cash. I know it's not sexy. I know it's not earning a lot of money, but cash is going to be very valuable. It's no different. I've shared this example before, is that it's the oxygen we breathe. Is that, yes, we all take it for granted that we can take a deep breath, we can exhale, and it seems like it's limitless. But you go underwater, all of a sudden you're like, wow, that air that I take for granted is very valuable to me. Same thing happens with cash. When we hit volatility with jobs data, with real estate market value losing, the stock market losing value, you're going to be very thankful that you kept the cash. Don't make the mistake I made in the late 2000s. The next one, number 4, is don't get busy doing nothing. This is one that, I'm pretty proud of the fact that I was an entrepreneur, that I started my own business. In 2002, I've shared with you guys that was partially motivated. My father passed away in 2000. I had a recalibration of what I was doing in my life, both professionally and so forth. And I was like, you know what? I think I need to build the life I want. I need to go out on my own. So I had to create a plan to make that happen. But one of the big things I learned on this was that being successful can make you do uncomfortable stuff. And a lot of us don't like to do the uncomfortable stuff, so we'll put it off and do what we're very comfortable with. And for me, it was my books, meaning I'm an accountant by trade. I had great QuickBooks, even for this business that had zero money practically coming in. So that's why I came up with, or I shared, don't get busy doing nothing. And I came up with a plan to help you out on this. It's called the 3-2-1 plan. And here's what I always share when I'm talking about the 3-2-1 plan, is that you really have 3 big things you've got to do. The first is you need to run a 3-scenario plan. This is, and it doesn't matter if you're starting a new business, if you've got a spouse that maybe is coming out of the workforce, or you're thinking about taking a different job that maybe is a step backwards, so that then you can have the big step forwards in the future. Any scenario you have, this 3-2-1 plan works. And here's what it is. First, run the 3-scenario planning where you say, okay, here's what I think will happen. But then I want you to run a scenario that says, oh wow, I'm going to be rich. This is going to work out perfectly. This is the maximization side of things. And then I want you to run the one that nobody wants to run, which is the worst case scenario. Is like, holy cow, how could I have put myself in this horrible situation? Make sure you run that 3rd plan, because I know it's uncomfortable, but that will be the plan that will let you know, hey, I can make it through this. I will be okay, because you will have planned for it and you won't have such a shock and awe moment if you do start to have some failure. Because I know I had a lot of trouble when I first started my company with getting business. And this is also ties back to the don't get busy doing nothing is that I wasn't focusing on what I should have been. And that leads to the 2 how questions you should ask yourself. First is, how much money do I need to survive? If you can go ahead and answer that question on the front end when you go through those 3 scenarios and figure out how much do I need to survive, you're going to have a leg up, because you can use that to mathematically figure out how much do I need to have in cash reserves, or maybe I don't even jump off and make this decision until I have that much covered. That also lets you ask, okay, if I know how much I need to survive, how am I going to get there? What are the steps? What are the plans I'm going to do? For me, it was trying to figure out, how am I going to get business? So I had to do that, and and by having this plan, it'll let me then focus on the what question, which is, what am I doing this week to make it happen? Because just having that voice in the background was enough to motivate me to quit just going through QuickBooks again and logging every transaction as soon as it's done versus batching stuff every few weeks so that I could go out there and start, essentially making relationships, networking, trying to figure out how I was actually going to get new business. If you ask yourself, what am I doing this week to make it happen? That puts a little more accountability into the process. So don't skip out on the 3-2-1 plan to help you from not getting busy doing nothing. Here's the last one I wanted to share with you guys. Don't seek out complication. Now, you're sitting there and you're hearing this and you're like, Brian, nobody seeks out complication on purpose, but I think we subliminally actually do this. I mean, it's one of those things when you look at who you want to be or success or what you perceive to be success, you'll be like, well, I think wealthy people, I hear it's easy to make money in real estate. That's a complication. Maybe I should do that. Or, hey, I hear that a lot of wealthy people will do separate account management where they'll go have somebody buy them instead of buying the S&P 500 index fund. Maybe I can just go buy all those shares within the fund through these complicated strategies that are being offered by some of the big custodians, where now I'll own a fractional share of every one of the companies in the S&P 500. You see a lot of this stuff where people crave. I know when I was doing taxes, when I was a young staff accountant doing tax preparation, whenever I'd see somebody with K1s, meaning they owned a partnership or they owned an S corporation, and this is how their income was showing up on their tax returns, I used to daydream as, man, it must be so awesome that they have all these K1s coming in. I was seeking out complication because I thought that all of that was going to be what would created my success. No, what I would tell you is try to keep your financial life as simple as possible. But the reality is that you can have that desire and you can actually try to keep that as your rudder in the background of keeping your financial life simplified. But as you reach more and more success, complexity will naturally happen to you. You don't have to seek it out. Now I look at my tax return with the commercial real estate, with the K1s that are flowing through. It all happens. I didn't have to seek it out. I'm just saying focus on the important behaviors. Don't go out and try to do things out of order because it will happen. What I would like you to do is, if you're young, if you're watching this and you're in your 20s, focus on your savings rate. That's the most important thing. Don't go try to load up complex investments when you haven't even started saving 20 to 25% and you're not maxing out your Roth IRA. There's a reason we've created the financial order of operations. If you'll go to moneyguy.com/resources, you'll see we've actually laid out the 9-step process for you that will help you figure out, what do I need to be doing first? Is it emergency reserves, paying down debt, or investing in that first Roth IRA? We've figured that out. That way you don't get yourself, there's nothing wrong with some of these complex investings between the commercial real estate as well as other things that are starting businesses. But there's a time and a place, and you need to make sure that you have a plan that doesn't leave you without enough cash or without the right plan, that you actually pull yourself towards failure instead of the success that you so desire. I hope that it's, because we even did a show to try to help you from the noise of everybody telling you how rich people invest. If you'll go check out, we did a show called The Secret Investing Strategies of the 1%. I think you'll find out that this kind of cuts through the myth and actually shows you what wealthy people actually do with their money, including what Bo and I do with our money. So I would ask you to go check that out. Hopefully, me sharing some of my personal mistakes is helpful for you. And you can, self-reflect on yourself and figure out, how do you take the next step to make your money the best version of itself. Okay, guys, one of our favorite things, and we have a special treat today. Since I don't have Bo, and by the way, I don't know because I don't see the chat. Bo's always the one that keeps us posted on the chat. Bo is actually at Disney World right now with the family. I should have probably put a picture up to showing the crying kids because Bo, first time at Disney World with the kids, he decides, what we're going to do? We're going to throw them on Space Mountain. So he threw his kids right into the deep end, and you can imagine there was hilarity ensued from that. But here's where the special treat is. since Bo's not out here today, we have FTE Daniel is going to be throwing the questions out to me today. So Daniel, welcome to the Money Guy Show. Your camera debut today.
Yeah, Brian, I'm super excited to be here today. We've got some great questions coming into the chat. I think people still think Bo's here, but hopefully we can get some good questions still. So our first one is from Chris Clark. He says, "Hi, I'm 23 years old and I'm currently making $60,000 $60,000 a year. I have $23,000 in student loans and I'm saving 20% of my income towards retirement. Should I stay at home with my parents until that loan is done?"
So I want to make sure because, of course, Bo's not here, so technically nothing's working like it should be. You give me the scenarios one more time, Daniel.
So it sounds like Chris is 23, so sounds like he just graduated out of college. He's making $60,000 a year.
That's great.
He has $23K in student loans, so he followed our rule of keeping that below his first year salary.
Yep.
And he's saving 20% of his income, so he's doing great already at 23.
Yeah.
So he just wants to know if he should stay at home with his parents to get that loan paid off even sooner, or what he should do there.
Chris, this is a great question, by the way. Here's the thing. It makes me go back to, because when I graduated college, had a good job lined up. By the way, paid a lot less, $28,000 a year as a staff accountant back in the 90s. But I was about to move. I knew I was moving in with my friends from college. A few of my roommates, we'd gotten a place in Atlanta. And here's how, now this is a little different, but I think it's a good experience share. I actually lived with my parents 3 months longer so I could afford to pay cash for a recliner. I know that it's kind of silly, but it is one of those things where I think this is a valuable question, and the fact that especially with student loan debt, you're trying to figure out, hey, where do I start my life, get out there and get independence? Because there is a lot of value to you living out there, an independent life versus living with the parents. But also there's a lot of temptation is, hey, maybe I could go ahead and get this debt completely paid off because I have zero expenses while I'm living with the parents. This is one of those things, really, Chris, is I think you have to weigh what are your personal opportunities here. Because look at the financial order of operations. It sounds like you are checking a ton of the boxes, because I imagine at 23 making $60,000 and you've already said that you're saving 20%. I got to believe you've already filled up the emergency bucket. That's the first place I'd step. I didn't hear any credit card debt. I only heard you talking about student loan debt. And assuming right now student loan debt doesn't even have an interest bearing in the building in the background, it's more of a low interest debt that's just sitting out there. So I think you're already somehow, even at a young age, you're already getting up to the higher steps of the financial order of operations, and the fact that look at your Roth IRA, because I'm hoping you've maxed that. That's part of your max out strategy. And then you can look at the retirement and the 3 buckets. But I think you're perfectly fine if you have a great opportunity to move out and that would make your quality of life better. I think you've done what you need to. Now you can fine tune this plan where if maybe you want to stay with the parents a few months early, a few months longer so you can pay down debt to a level. Maybe you're trying to get it down to below $20,000 or you have some personal goal. You have the freedom, but I can already tell you have the most important ingredient of discipline and deferred gratification figured out. So I think you've won the opportunity, the keys to your freedom to go out there and live your best life.
Yeah, that was a great question, Chris. And let's see, we got RM up next. He says, "Hey all, if I make enough money to max out my 401k, is it worth doing traditional contributions only and investing the tax savings into my Roth IRA, or just maxing it with only Roth contributions?" So it sounds like what RM is asking is for his 401k, it sounds like it offers pre-tax and Roth. So should he just do pre-tax in the 401k and do the tax savings into Roth, or just do Roth contributions in the 401k?
Yeah, this is a good question, but it also, I don't mean for it to always come back to the financial order of operations, but if I've created a roadmap and then you ask me a question about it, I'm always going to bring it back to make sure you are on course with what we've shared in our plans. I think it's interesting because realize if you looked at our financial order of operations, go check it out. You can go to moneyguy.com/resources. you'll see that step 5 of the financial order of operations is your health savings account and your Roth IRA. Step 6, is max out your employer's plan. It makes sense I'm doing these all out of order, so I apologize for that, RM. But step 2 is the employer match. So hopefully you've already done the employer match. Now we're trying to figure out, hey, do we do Roth contributions in my 401k or do I do Roth IRA? Can you do both? And then, and this also has the added bonus of you're saying, should I do pre-tax versus Roth contributions in my 401k? The biggest thing I would first say, because I thought this is a little outside of the financial order of operations. You said I could do traditional 401k, then use the tax savings to fund my Roth IRA. I like the thought that the Roth IRA, assuming you make under the income threshold, should come first and is separated. So I want you to do the Roth just as a primary on your focusing of funding the Roth IRA if you're allowed to, and do that at one of the low-cost custodians. That's your Vanguards, your Charles Schwabs, your Fidelity Investments. The reason I like those custodians, or they're the biggest providers out there in the marketplace, is because they offer target retirement index funds. Any of these index funds with the total market funds plus the S&P 500 plus these target date index funds, you're going to have all the investment stuff covered. But then you can, when you roll into your 401k step 6, you're probably saying, okay, I'm young, I have a good income. Should I do the Roth contributions? And that's where we have that extra rule set that we share, is that it depends upon where your tax rate is and your age and your goals of when you want to retire. For somebody who's in a high tax bracket and a good bit older, where compounding is not as valuable as it could be for a 20-something, then it makes sense to go that traditional route. Because if you're in the 37% federal tax bracket, and say you live in a state like California where you have a 13% state income tax, you could see 50 cents on the dollar is actually going to taxes. So if you can save 50 cents on the dollar by doing traditional, it makes sense to consider those things. But for somebody who's younger and you have a lot more opportunity for compounding growth and you're not in those highest tax brackets, it makes sense that, you should do the Roth 401k option, because you're going to get a lot of opportunity for compounding growth over the long term. So that's why we've actually given some guidance is, go figure out where you are with your marginal tax brackets, both on the federal and the state, meaning what your next dollar of income will be taxed at. Add those two numbers together and then compare it. Is that number over 30%? If it is, then you especially if you're older, you probably are very much want to take advantage of traditional deductible contributions. If you're younger than that, or you're in tax brackets less than those, when you look at how much you're paying in taxes, you could consider the really huge benefit of doing Roth compounding growth, because it's tax-free, even though you don't get the current year deduction. Those things work together nicely. But don't forget, RM, you can actually fund both of these. I just don't want you to skip step 5, which is Roth contribution. Roth IRA contributions come before you're trying to load up that Roth 401k. Daniel, did I give them enough color there and enough detail?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Brian, I would say, since RM said that they make enough to max out their 401k, they might be in a higher tax bracket, but they definitely need to look at the 30% rule and see where they fall there, and then consider traditional or Roth. And we have another FOO question up next from Aaron Hafman. He said, is it important to get all 3 buckets? My income currently isn't high enough to max all of Roth IRA, HSA, and then still have some left over for brokerage. Should I max Roth, do some HSA, and then the rest brokerage? So what are some things that Aaron needs to consider? And maybe it depends on if he's retiring early, if he needs to do any brokerage. What would you tell Aaron, Brian?
Yeah, this is a great question, Aaron. The fact that I've actually had this come up in in-person events too. Like we're doing a retirement plan meeting, and I remember somebody raising their hand and saying, "Man, it just seems wrong that I'm going to load up all these buckets and I'm not going to take care of my kids' college education." And, even though I have a high savings rate. And this is what we give this clarification. If you go to learn.moneyguy.com, we actually have a course on the financial order of operations. It goes much deeper than the free resource that we give out on moneyguy.com/resources with just the 9 steps labeled, because this is where that nuance or that detail comes into play. If you're a person who, let's just say, if you make less than $100,000 a year in household, you're going to run into the situation that Aaron's talking about, where you could very well fill up you could max out your Roth. You could not hit the full 20,500 on step 6, which is max out your retirement accounts, and still graduate as long as you're saving that 25% of your gross income. I have no problem with you graduating from step 6, which is max out the IRA, the 401ks, your employer plans. You can graduate to step 7 even if you haven't hit the full 20,500, as long as you've reached 25% savings rate. Once you have that, now you can look at the 3 buckets in conjunction with step 8, which is also prepaid college expenses and other things. There's nothing wrong, and this is a pretty natural reaction, is that when you're younger, the tax benefits and the opportunity to save so much in those Roth accounts, which have that tax-free compounding growth, is so powerful that I think a lot of people, you will wake up one day and you're like, man, I'm in my late 30s and I feel like all my money, I'm retirement rich and I don't have a lot of money in tax-free or after-tax money, primarily after tax, because now you find yourself having trouble to pay off cars. You're like, I should be at the point in my life where I'm paying cash for cars, not financing these things, but all my money's in retirement accounts. This is why we try to give you the freedom with the 3 bucket strategy, especially if you're somebody who's part of this FIRE movement. If you're going to retire in your 50s instead of in your 60s, you do need to pay attention to where your savings rate is. As long as you're in that 20-25% bracket, there will come a point that you'll say, I need to get some after-tax money built up so that I can pay cash for vehicles, so that I have money that's available to me, as well as so I can move to step 8, which allows me to save for the kids' college. But the trigger point for that is graduating past that 25%, because I don't want you to miss out on those retirement savings, especially while you're younger, because the compounding growth opportunity is just so powerful. Don't miss out, but you will once you cross over that, because it's not uncommon that we find people that are saving 30%, 35%. There's nothing wrong with a big chunk of that money being in that after-tax brokerage account so that you have easier access. It's also going to be great for when you find that real estate opportunity, or you want to fund the kids' college, or you just want to pay cash for the vehicle that's coming up. It's nice to have that opportunity to invest outside of just retirement accounts. But look, it's okay also that it might take a while to get there. And that's why I say it might be in your 30s, even early 40s, before you find yourself in that situation, because the opportunity that our government provides in the tax code to pre-fund those tax-favored retirement accounts is just too good to pass up initially.
Yeah, that's great, Ryan. I know we see a lot of folks come through our doors that have maybe everything in their 401k and IRA and tax advantage accounts, and it's definitely important to get some after tax, especially if you're planning to retire early.
Yep.
The next question we have is from Scott. He said, would you guys advise using a Roth IRA as an emergency fund location? My thought is that I'm less likely to use the funds if they're earmarked for retirement.
Yeah, I have several issues with using Roth accounts. I mean, this is always, Bo is the one that brings up that you can use Roth as emergency, and I always cringe a little bit when he shares that. And it is a superpower that Roth IRAs, this is one more reason why they're step 5, is because they not only grow tax-free, which gives you tremendous opportunity to take advantage of, the compounding growth. But people love to talk about, hey, this is also, you don't have to keep a ton of cash because you can just load up that Roth IRA and it's a closeted emergency fund too. But there are a few problems with this. First of all, I shared on today's Q&A show, I was sharing my financial mistakes, and the biggest mistake was I didn't max out my Roth in some of those early years. But I also see people think about, when I was sharing all the details, I had a great rate of return that I shared, and that's primarily because your Roth assets can be invested in super compounding, aggressive growth type things. Because think about it, if you're going to try to invest $1 to try to turn it into $88, as I'm always talking about, you're not putting that in cash and equivalents. You're not putting that in bonds. You're going to put that in something that's giving you some turbocharged opportunity to turn this thing into a rocket ship to grow. So just by the asset class selection and the investment that you're putting in your Roth, those aren't great cash reserve type holdings. I mean, it's not something that if you got in an emergency, you go, hey, I'll just go pull it out of my Roth. Well, more than likely that Roth is already invested in some turbocharged investment. And if we're in a volatile period where you needed the cash because, say you lost your job, you got a medical emergency, those things very well could be happening at the same time that we had market volatility and other things where your investment could be down 20 to 30%. That would be tremendously scary. So that's number one is that realize that you're probably investing that Roth IRA in aggressive assets. Not a great place to go be pulling out of for an emergency that you might be having. The second thing is that I think about the government has made these things. Why is step 5 of the financial order of operations, HSAs and Roth IRAs, is because the government's giving you tremendous incentives. They put a carrot out there to encourage you to save this because they're going to let it grow tax-free. They're going to give you all these benefits and opportunities. So good. This thing is so good that they cap how much you can put into it. I mean, if you can only put $6,000 in something, it's not like I can go pull that money out and then they say, hey, I don't want you to miss out on that money you pulled out because we need to let you take advantage of that compounding growth. We'll let you put it back in. No, it's a one-way street. They cap how much you can put in. So if you pull that money out in some point in the future for this emergency, there's no way to get it back in there. I guess we could get into 60-day rules and other things, but that's not a good practice. So I say be careful, pulling money out of something because it's hard to refill or put money back into that bucket. It's more of a one-way street. And plus, I don't love you taking away from that army of dollars that is already turbocharged with all the tax incentives, the ability to invest in growth assets. It's just not an ideal place for emergency reserves. Yes, you can do it. I mean, I get it. Sometimes you get, especially I mentioned earlier, medical emergencies. There might be a reason that just out of last resort, you had to go to this because it was a dire situation. But overall, I'd rather you have true cash reserves than to look at your Roth IRA as a cash reserves option. I mean, I think, like I said, it's a dire emergency type place that you can go break the glass, put it behind glass, so you have to break it to get into it. But it is not what you ideally should plan off of.
Yeah, Brian, that's a great answer. I think, they should just rewind and watch the part where you talked about missing your Roth IRA contributions. And you didn't take money out, you just missed contributions, but you could say the same thing. $1,000 here, $2,000 there could be like using it as an emergency fund. And those dollars would be worth hundreds of thousands by retirement. So I don't think you want to touch your Roth IRA unless
you make a good point.
Absolutely have to.
You make a good point, Daniel, on the fact that in the show, because I know this will get turned into a highlight and people won't be able to see that as easily. I shared that I missed in my career, I've missed $10,000 worth of Roth contributions, Roth IRA contributions. At $10,000, we've mathematically calculated it out. I think today, in my late 40s, that $10,000 would have been worth $88,000. Documented. Because we looked at the rate of return I've made in my Roth IRA, it would have been worth around around $88,000. If we'd have let it continue to grow all the way until I reach retirement, it would be worth over $600,000. So guys, Daniel's point is spot on, is that the opportunity cost of you using that money can be tremendous to your long-term self.
So yeah, that was a great question, Scott. Next up, we have Nathan, or Nate, if you will. He says, if you do DoorDash or similar for some extra side cash, does it make sense to do a SEP IRA after getting your full-time employer match? And after you get your match, is it better to prioritize the 401k or the SEP IRA? So it sounds like Nate is beginning to get into the world of self-employed retirement plans, and he's trying to figure out if he should prioritize his own or his employer's, or how he should go about figuring that out.
Yeah, this is I think it's pretty common now that people have side hustles. I think it's really cool in this new modern world that you can have a great job, but then you can also go out there if you have some spare time and load up and really fund towards goals, especially if you got big things coming up, housing purchases and so forth. There's now an avenue to do this. So let's talk about. First, I always want to pay respect to the financial order of operations, because the questions that Nate was asking was primarily He's got an employer plan, but he's now, I guess, is probably doing his taxes, and the accountant says, hey, you self-employment income, you could also do a SEP IRA that would lower your taxes. So it creates a great opportunity. And that's where the question came from. But I want to back up, because that's all in step 6, kind of, in maximizing the retirement employer contributions. Because don't forget, when you fund a SEP IRA, that is not funded by you. It's funded by the employer. Well, since you're self-employed, you are the employer and you're funding it. So it all falls into that step 6 of the financial order of operations. I don't want to neglect step number 5. First, this is just more of a review. I'm counting on Nate, who's asking this question, that he's already loaded up the Roth IRA, because the Roth IRA is going to come before maximizing even the employer 401k. But let's just assume the Roth IRA was respected and it's been fully funded. Let's now move to Nate's question, where he's trying to figure out, hey, okay, should I do the employer plan or should I do the SEP IRA? It really depends upon, and this goes back to, and we covered this earlier, what your growth goal and your tax situation is, as well as when you're going to retire and your age. So if somebody's in their 20s, and you have to look at what every dollar could become. Now, SEP IRAs are awesome in the fact that, probably when you're getting your taxes done, your accountant comes to you, or you're in TurboTax or whatever you're using, and it says, hey, you qualify for a SEP IRA, because you can have a 401k with your employer. And if the income source is completely independent of the employer, you could set up a separate SEP IRA for your side hustle as well, and fund that at a percentage of the profit of this endeavor. So you probably could do 20-25% of what you made doing side hustles like DoorDash, as Nate described here. But you have to say, okay, is the tax savings more beneficial to me, or should I take those dollars and load up my employer's plan more? Because maybe, I'm not going to get a tax deduction, especially if I'm funding this in a Roth 401k contribution. But what could that money become down the road? That's what I would probably compare those numbers, that decision making, to. What is my savings rate? Have I reached 25% of my gross income? If you haven't reached 25% of your gross income, then maybe it does, and you're in your 20s, and your tax rate's not over 30%, then I would probably load up that employer Roth 401k option before I do the SEP IRA. But if you find that you're in a higher tax situation, you have done the 25%, I think there's nothing wrong with taking advantage of what the SEP IRA. There will come a point because some of you watching this might have enough income success that you could actually do all the above. I mean, there's nothing that says that you can't have a Roth IRA, especially if you do a backdoor Roth, because your income's high enough that you could do a Roth conversion strategy. You could load up the $20,500 into your employer's plan, and then you could still, because this is completely independent, separate income, you could do a SEP IRA. But if I was trying to prioritize exactly like Nate said, I'd look at my savings rate, I'd take into account my age, and then make sure that if I haven't, and if the tax savings aren't going to be that tremendous, I'd load up that employer Roth 401k before I maximized the SEP IRA, because if you're not in a high tax bracket, I think those dollars and the compounding growth could be even more valuable. That was a great question, though.
Yeah, it was a great question. Yeah, the SEP IRA could definitely be powerful if it lets you put even more dollars away, tax advantage for retirement. The next question we have is from Leslie. She says, and this is a situation a ton of people are in now, including me and Nate. So I'm excited to see how you answer this, Brian. She says, my sister and I are now in the financial position to purchase our first home, but interest rates and housing prices are continuing to increase. Mm-hmm. Any advice for first-time homebuyers seeking to buy in 2022?
Yeah, this is, I think it's so interesting, this weird world. We talk about this a lot among the content team as well, because, y'all have heard me talk about Team Crash. I think it's important for me to share that this does depend geographically to where you live, but overall real estate right now is so unique because we have an inventory crisis. If you think about, because I think a lot of people on Team Crash remember 2008 through 2011, where the whole housing market got crushed. I've shared earlier that my house the house I had in Georgia went from like over $500,000 down to $250,000 almost overnight. The difference between this housing market now in 2022 versus what we had in 2008 through 2011 was that we overbuilt back then. But and that's why we had tons of inventory. There wasn't a lot of demand for all that supply that was out there. So the impact, going back to basic economics, was the price got crushed. Well, fast forward to 2022. Let's look at our situation. Right now, I know here in the Nashville area, we're way behind on inventory, meaning that there are way more people needing a house than the supply of houses that are available. So if you can just take those same basic principles, demand is ultra high, supply is ultra low. The only thing that can give is prices are going to go up. So that definitely will have a big impact. So, and then, by the way, this is not just a Nashville problem. I saw in a recent study that America as a whole is about 4 million homes behind where we should be. Because realize, I think the ripple effect was from that 2008 to 2011 real estate collapse was a lot of people got really scared. A lot of people went out of business. Banks didn't want to give out the money as easily because they got burned on real estate. So it built this situation to where now we're sitting into where we didn't keep up with the supply of homes like we should have. So, and now look, I think a lot of people think, okay, interest rates, they're raising interest rates. The Federal Reserve's raising interest rates to fight inflation and some of these other things that are going on. Maybe that will drive the housing costs down. Well, once again, we go back to the basic economics example that I was given. If you have people moving to your area and, with demand and the supply is just low, I don't know that interest rates, yes, that could slow it down because maybe less people are trying to move at that point. So maybe it does take down pushes down the demand with higher interest rates, but it probably doesn't fix the inventory issue. So Leslie, here's the unique thing. I think that if you don't have to move in the next 12 to 18 months, it's okay if you just kind of wait to see what happens. Because I know right now we feel like we're on this hockey stick ride where you're seeing housing prices going up. I mean, I was going to say aggressively 20 to 30%, but I know in places like Nashville, we're seeing even numbers much higher than 30% appreciation. That's not sustainable. That's more of that hockey stick. I don't think a year or 2 years from now you'll see houses have doubled again. That just seems just wild to me. So I think it's okay to understand that if you don't have to make a decision right now, you can wait to see if this thing will levelize out a little bit. But I will tell you, I don't think it's going to go down. Now, if your time horizon is super long, that where you and your sister are trying to move to, you'll be there for 15, 20 years in the future, you can be a little more aggressive with saying, okay, I'm not going to sit on the sidelines any longer, because time on itself, especially for a personal use asset, will massage out a lot of this volatility that we're going to be experiencing in the coming decade. And it probably will also help you in the short term with interest rates are probably going to continue to go up. I do expect, because I think a lot of people have this false sense that a 5% mortgage is a high mortgage. No, historically, that's still not a high mortgage rate. I mean, my first house in the 90s was 6 3/4, and I thought I stole it. I mean, because it was just such a good rate to me at the time. We've just been spoiled with these 2 and 3% interest rates. So I don't even think that the market will completely freak out with a 5% mortgage rate. So that's why I know I'm speaking because it's such a specialized answer. So let me summarize this a little better in the fact that if you can wait, I think that that's not the worst thing. But if you have to buy a house or you're just dead set that you're going to do it, I would then do a check to say, how long am I going to be in this house? Because you don't want this to be a 5-year or even a 7-year decision, because if it's a short-term decision, you're much more likely to get burned by this huge run-up in housing versus if you're going to be there for an extended period of time. The longer your time horizon, the more grace you get on the jumping into this process. But this is just a unique thing that I think will levelize. I mean, I don't think prices will crash, but we could see prices come down 5-10% because the market got ahead of itself on the pricing. When you're going through a hockey stick moment, it's not uncommon for there to be a little frothiness to it. I'd also pay attention because I don't know, Leslie, where you're coming from. I know in the past, cities like Las Vegas or the whole state of Florida, when they do these skyscrapers and these high rises and these condominiums and other things, they do tend to overbuild in those type of situations. That maybe in those unique markets where they are going vertical, maybe there's an opportunity there, but I mean, I'd have to look at what the demand is in that area. But I would pay attention to all those factors, and then don't forget to go back to the basic economics of supply, demand, and then the price impact of all that. Do that same type of analysis that you heard me just do in this Q&A and compare that to your specific marketplace, and I think that could help.
Yeah, that was a great question, Leslie, and a great answer, Brian. And I'd say you said people were scared after 2008, and construction companies were one of the groups that was scared, and they're not building like they were back then, at least not yet. So, and with our huge housing shortage, it might not be the same as it was back then. But great question, Leslie.
Yeah, I mean, we lost South Atlanta. Most people I knew in South Atlanta worked in the construction industry. That's one of the reasons it was a double whammy. Is they got those businesses went away, so that's why housing didn't recover as fast. So really geography means a lot in this whole real estate thing. You always hear about location. We're both from Georgia, Daniel. That definitely played out. Whereas here in Nashville, in this Franklin area that we live, because I studied this market from 2008 to 11, it only got beat up by 10% at the most. Whereas in Atlanta, it was a 50% drop. So geography definitely plays into this. Pay attention to migration patterns, pay attention to inventory in the area, and then how long you can stay there. And those can help you with figuring out, what you need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Next up, we have Bruce. Bruce says, "Good morning, Daniel /MG team." And Brian, I'll add that in there. When looking at the FU, does a backdoor Roth sit at the same step as a traditional Roth? Does income limit and backdoor penalty add another layer? So it sounds like Bruce is probably at or near the income limit to contribute to a Roth. And he's wondering if he should switch over to a traditional IRA, or if he should consider doing the backdoor strategy to do a Roth IRA. What do you think, Brian?
Well, I mean, if you have the option to do the Roth conversion strategy, also known as the backdoor Roth, Bruce, I mean, you've got to do it, especially because if you're in an income situation where you're right there at the crux of where the government doesn't even let you fund this anymore because you make too much money, take advantage of this. There's a reason the government's trying to shut all these type of things down, is because they're good. I mean, the tax-free growth is a tremendous benefit and value over the long term. I mean, on today's show, I was sharing a $10,000 Roth contribution over a few years today would be worth just under $90,000. And I'm getting older, but I'm not that old. And that under 90,000 could be worth over 600 at retirement. So that's a huge benefit that you don't want to miss out on. So if you have that option, take advantage of it. Now, I think what you probably could look at this, Daniel, another way is he's saying, because some people might be thinking, well, I have another IRA asset out there, like a rollover IRA or something or a SEP IRA. So I'm not able to do a backdoor Roth conversion strategy because I have this other IRA that's going to cloud it up. Should I do a traditional IRA with the hope that, before I move on to doing the employer plan in step 6? And I would tell you, that's a little more nuanced. That's where you probably would move on right into if you don't have the Roth conversion opportunity, you'd roll right into your employer's plan, load that up, look at your tax rate to see if you should be doing Roth 401k contributions within your employer plan, because it is one of those interesting things where 401ks and 403bs that offer Roth contributions, they don't have an income limit like the Roth IRA does. So you might still be able to fund that tax-free growth if you're thinking about your 3-bucket strategy through the employer plan. But by all means, step 5, the tax-free growth, if you can do Roth conversion strategy, take advantage of it, because then now you can do both. You can do the Roth conversion strategy plus load up that employer retirement plan. That's more retirement savings. That's more tax favored savings. That's a win.
Yeah, that was great, Brian. I don't think I have anything to add to that. And great question, Bruce. The next one is another question about our taxable buckets. And I just couldn't resist asking it because it was such a good question. So Braden is 29 and he's married, and they max out all tax advantaged retirement accounts, which is 45% of their take home pay. So not sure how much that is of gross income, but it sounds like it's probably at least 25% of their gross. And they want to know how to know when they start filling the third bucket of a taxable account, assuming a typical retirement age. So if they're retiring at 65 or 67, when do they need to start worrying about a taxable account, or do they, and how should they look at that?
Yeah, this is, and did you say 40 or 45% savings rate?
45% of take home pay.
45% of take home. Man, Braden is definitely a financial mutant, because that's incredible. I mean, that's one of those things where if you're saving 45, I had written 40%, so 45%, see, that's got a gold star on it. Braden, here's what I would tell you. If somebody who's saving at that threshold, and I think Daniel, did he mention that potentially his family wants to leave the workforce early?
Yeah, so Braden said assuming a typical retirement age. So it sounds like right now he's planning on, 65 or 67, but could change.
So that does change my thoughts a little bit, Braden, and this will be good for everybody in the audience too, because I think this is why I love financial planning, is because it is so specialized. And that's why, yes, we can give you, and I always try to, when I answer these Q&A shows, I try to give everybody the breadcrumbs or the nuggets to try to figure out how this pertains to your personal situation. But everybody's a little different, because, it's not uncommon when you hear somebody saving 45% of their take home. You're like, well, they must want to retire when they're 45 or 50 years of age. But Braden right here is saying, hey, I'm okay working until normal retirement age, or at least that's what's been put out before us. So that's going to be different from somebody who's trying to leave the workforce when they're 50 years old. So let's take this and let's talk about what can somebody apply to this. When I find out somebody is saving at this threshold, I would say kudos to you, but also let's make sure you're enjoying each decade of life that you're in. I pick on Bo when we were talking about, because I think it's just an achiever's curse in the fact that, especially if you don't come from money, because I had dinner with another couple, my wife and I did, and we were just talking about how in our 20s and 30s we were in such a hurry to get through all the things we thought meant success in life, like go find a spouse, go buy the first house, make sure you have children by this age. There was just a lot of pressure you're putting on yourself to get through all the things that you think are attributed to success. I would tell you to make sure that you're also building in to enjoy the sweetness of every decade of life. I look back at my own life. I loved it when I was in my 20s. My wife and I went to Italy on a trip before we had kids. We did it dirt poor, where we got ripped off in all the cities. We were dragging our luggage down cobblestone. We were using all the public transportation. We had no tour guides, so we had all kind of language barrier issues. But now I look back with such sweetness on the blossoming memories that even the things that were stressful were phenomenal long term, because they just add to the storytelling and just the memories of that situation. So Braden, I'm going to just say, just give it that much of a pass, is just make sure that you are enjoying each decade, because I don't want you, there's a fine line between financial mutant and a financial miser. I want to make sure that you are maximizing the fun that you should have by every decade too. But I do think it's one of those things where if you're typical retirement age and you're saving 45%, then yeah, let's make sure that we're taking advantage of all the tax favored stuff. And that's why traditional financial order of operations, moneyguy.com/resources, or if you want a deeper dive, you can go to learn.moneyguy.com for our course on the financial order of operations. But there's a reason that it prioritizes, the maxing out retirement, the Roth IRA and HSAs. As before we get to step 7, which is hyperaccumulation, which has the 3 buckets, is because the government limits how much you can put in all these different accounts, because they are really frothy from a tax benefit wise. So Braden, if you're going to retire at a normal age, I would tell you there's nothing wrong with loading up all those retirement accounts and then going through them, and then eventually coming to that step 7, which is hyperaccumulation and getting the 3 buckets. But if you're a person that wants to retire early, or you want to make sure you have after-tax money so you can pay cash for a car, I'm going to give you permission is once you've exceeded 25% of your gross income or your take-home pay, 25% of your gross income in savings, you can go ahead and move to step 7. So it's really, that's where I'm telling you the personalization or customization of your situation and when you'll need this money will help guide you on, hey, should I go ahead once I'm over 25%, graduate to step 7, hyperaccumulation and the 3 bucket strategy, or should I stay back because I know I'm going to work until 65, so maybe it makes more sense to load up and get the tax benefit of these retirement accounts before I go and start doing the taxable side of things. You have a little freedom there to kind of play in, but for me, the graduation point is 25% of your gross income is being saved on step 6.
Yeah, that's great. And Braden, you're doing great, saving 45% of your take-home pay. The next question we have is from Robert. Robert wants to know, where is the best place to find a good financial advisor? He wants one not just for investment allocation, but someone that could help navigate taxes, a home purchase, and more. So, Brian, do you know where he could look for a financial advisor?
Well, look, I'm going to first. The easy answer is that we are financial advisors. We work with clients. I think last time we checked, we were in 45 states is where our clients were. So if you've reached that point, we always would love to have an opportunity to audition for that role of being your next financial advisor. You can go to aboundwealth.com. We have work with us. You can go to moneyguy.com. We have links there as well. But I do think it's worthwhile. I don't want to just give out a 30-second answer and move on. I think because maybe we're not the perfect fit. So what does somebody do if we're not the perfect fit for them? Is you first need to understand there's 3 different ways advisors can get paid. There's the commission type, which means that when they sell you a product, they get a cut off of it, a commission. And they have a different standard too. It's called suitability. And I always tell people candy bars are suitable to be eaten, but it's not necessarily the most healthy opportunity for you to ingest and eat something. And that's why we'll move on to what I call the fiduciary obligation. That's where somebody, instead of just suitable, they have to actually give you advice that's in your best interest. And that's typically going to be an RIA type investment a financial planner that's going to be either a broker-dealer or fee-only. So fee-based or fee-only is going to fall primarily in that fiduciary standard. I would, first of all, ask them. If you go to moneyguy.com/resources, we actually have, I believe, the 8 questions you should ask a financial advisor while you're going through the process of interviewing. And it's okay to ask them, are you a fiduciary? Meaning you are legally required to put my interests first. That's going to be more like, instead of just going and buying the candy bar, you're now going to be working with a nutritionist who's going to tell you what's the best thing to put in your body to get the best performance out of your body. It's the same thing with your personal finances. I like fiduciary standard because that allows you to know, hey, this person is legally on the line to make sure they give me the best advice. So now let's talk about the difference between fee-based and fee-only. Fee-based is somebody who can, in addition to giving you advice, they can also do, for a fee, they can also take a commission. Maybe they're doing life insurance, and look, you might need life insurance, but you just need to be aware that they're going to make a commission off that. Whereas fee-only, I'll just go ahead and tell you, that's where we fall in that category, fee-only, and we are the unicorns of the industry. There's just not a lot of us. Most of the financial field is sales folks, but there's several places you can find fee-only financial advisors. You can look at, there's NAPFA, that's NAPFA.org. That's the National Association of Personal Financial Advisors. Everybody who is part of NAPFA, and when you go to their website, it's going to let you type in your zip code, is everyone there has signed an oath that they are indeed a fiduciary fee-only advisor. There's also the Garrett Planning Network. There's also XY Planning Network. These are all believe all 3 of these different options I've just thrown out are requiring fiduciary obligations from anybody who's on their referral networks. But those are all great places to kind of go check it out. And hopefully you'll go check out our options that we put forward, because this is part of the abundance cycle. We hope that we can love on you, give you tons of free advice. You'll, we have people come in for tours all the time that found us right after college. We've been creating content now for going on over 15 years. So it's not uncommon that somebody who found us right after college has now reached a level of success that they need somebody like us, a co-pilot, and that's the abundance cycle fulfilled, where I don't mind loving on you, giving you tons of free advice. But I would ask, give us a shot. That's kind of the payoff point for us, is taking that relationship to the next level.
Yeah, Brian, that's a great answer. And I think it's easy from when you're in the inside looking at other financial advisors on the inside, it can be easy to say, oh, well, yeah, you might not want to go there. You might want to look here instead. But for somebody that's not part of the industry and isn't necessarily super into finance, it might be hard to find somebody that has their best interests at heart. So I do think our 8 questions you should ask your financial advisor at moneyguy.com/resources is a great place to start. You don't need to know much about financial advisors. If you stick to those questions, you'll get some good answers that will show you more about who you would consider working with. The next question we have is from Kevin. Kevin said he's tempted to divert savings away from retirement to save for his first home. How do you balance saving for retirement versus purchasing your first home? And he gave some more information. So he's 30 years old, looking for his first home. He's saving 30% of his income for retirement, and he makes $65K a year. But it sounds like a lot of us out there, he might be having trouble buying his first home and wants to know how to prioritize that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I know that is a big one. First, Kevin, here's the good news about first-time home purchases is that we give you tons of grace on that down payment. Don't be beating yourself up thinking I got to get to 20%, because there's a lot of talking heads out there in the financial space tell you got to put down 20% on that first home. That's tough. I mean, it just is hard to get there. So I'm going to tell you, on your first home, I think it's okay if you're only putting down 3 to 5%. So that's going to take a lot of weight off of your shoulders on how much you have to do. And when we do that on purpose, and we build this into the ground rules of our financial order of operations, if you're checking out the full deep dive course, which is at learn.moneyguy.com, we actually cover some of this stuff, because this was part of when we revised this or updated the financial order of operations course, we covered this specifically. But I do think that it's one of those things where if you know you only have to save 3 to 5%, now how does this fit into the whole process? And we already know step 4 is cash reserves. If you think about you're trying to figure out 3 to 6 months on your cash reserves, I would let this be part of that decision-making process too, is that if you know you're 3 to 6 months on your cash reserves, but you also want to have a down payment on your house in the next 18 months, 24 months, or 36 months, build that into that step number 4, which is cash reserves, because if the number is a lesser amount, like 3 or 5%, I think you can, especially with somebody who's saving 30% of their income. You can, look, I'm going to give you a lot of grace. That first 25%, that's what it takes to get to step 7 of the financial order of operations of hyperaccumulation. So anything over that 25%, look, I'm going to give you the freedom there's nothing wrong with that going to the cash and equivalents while you're building up that house down payment. That's not a problem. I even going to give you the grace, because I think all of us have done this. I even shared my financial mistakes on today's show when we did the full Q&A live stream. And I shared that while I was starting my business, I just didn't have a lot of money coming in, so I didn't get to maximize all the retirement accounts, including Roth IRA, which I consider some of the most valuable money that you can invest in yourself for the future. I screwed that up. So it's okay if maybe instead of saving 30%, you can go down to 20% on the traditional things like the Roth IRAs, the health savings accounts, and then even your employer plan while you're loading up the buckets for that house down payment. But you need to be scared. I always tell people, when you do things that vary from this financial order of operations, if you ever get off that path, it's kind of like if you're going to pull the car, you're driving the car down the road, and you're hoping that when you roll it off the road, if you got distracted or you had a flat tire and your steering wheel got yanked, you're hoping that it's a nice level roll off on grass that you can come off a little bit and then quickly recover and come back on, versus you took it off a cliff. it's okay if you get diverted in the short term, but you need to be very scared, and you need to also make sure that you're diverting it on a flat surface, meaning that you've kind of taken into account all the other things that are going on in your life, like there's no gaping holes in your financial future for the next 18 months that maybe you doing this retirement plan cutting into. Like, I'll tell you what a gaping hole that puts you on taking the steering wheel off a cliff is if you took your emergency reserves down to zero. That would give me great pause. But somebody like yourself who's saving 30%, you probably could just now take your emergency reserves down to 3 months versus having the 6 months that you already had. Build that cash down payment for your first home purchase into the plan, and you're rolling it off track just slightly, but you're going to pull it back on. You're scared enough, you can't catch much speed there, so you go get it back on track ASAP. You're going to be okay. So that's the grace I give you. Remember, with financial stuff, this is why we did this show today. You can make lots of mistakes and still have tremendous long-term success, but you just got to do the majority of the stuff. We hear about all the time that you can get into the Hall of Fame of baseball with a 300% batting average. Finance is kind of the same way. You can you can make a lot of mistakes and still have long-term success. Just make sure you are constantly paying attention, putting in the homework, and then trying to figure out when you do get off track a little bit that you're trying to figure out a plan to get it right back on course as soon as possible.
Yeah, Kevin, that was a great question. And I bet it is hard to save 30% to retirement and save for a house, especially with house prices going up as they are and interest rates going up. It probably feels like that house is running away from you. So yeah, if you can reduce it a little bit temporarily, but make sure you get right back on track as soon as you get that house. Our last question is from Houston, and he had a question I thought you'd like about electric cars.
Uh-oh.
So Houston says his wife and he are in their late 30s with a savings rate of 35%. And if we're investing at such a high rate and we have money left over, is buying a luxury car, and he said Rivian specifically, that we have been wanting, still a bad choice?
Well, I don't think, look, I think buying those nice vehicles, that is more of a step 8 type process. If you're looking at the 9 steps of the financial order of operations, but it also falls into what are you doing on our 23-8 plan? This is why we give you these rules. I want you to have some solid understanding of why we did this. When I came up with 23-8, my goal was, I know we're in this unique time right now where used cars are appreciating better than the S&P 500. What a weird, quirky world we live in right now. But that won't last forever. Cars long term are typically not great investments because they depreciate rapidly. You have to pay to maintain them. You have to pay to put fuel inside of them. And it's just, there's a lot of things, and they get antiquated rapidly. So the thought of all that means these things aren't great for your finances. So I always hate when, and I'm skipping the step of, I see so many people have bigger car payments than they do what they're saving and investing monthly for the future, like in their Roth IRAs and their 401ks. All that is a disaster over the long term. But if you were saving 30% of your income and you've been doing this well, and you know that you can save up enough money to essentially pay 12 months same as cash on a luxury brand like Rivian, I think it's okay. Because I do think, I will tell you, electric vehicles, because you guys debate me all the time. We even did a show on it. Tesla, for sure, because I know you're asking about Rivian, but I know a lot more about Tesla. But I think we'll see what happens with Rivian. I know I have a friend who I went out to dinner with this weekend. He put in a deposit on the Rivian's SUV, and I'm excited when they get this car. Because I can't wait to check it out, because I do think there's a lot of benefits with electric vehicles, especially for day-to-day driving. Now, road trips, until we get to 400 to 500 miles easily in an electric car. Road trips, I've done them. Like my wife and I went to Augusta, Georgia recently. We took the Tesla. And it was awesome, but you're stopping every 2 hours, and you're going to stop for 20 to 30 minutes to charge it up. It makes road trips a little longer, but I do think the electrification of cars, especially if they get the battery technology to where it can go to 400 or 500 miles, it's going to be a game changer, but you just need to make sure, and I know a lot of you push, and this is the point I was getting to, is that Tesla's, a lot of people are saying, hey, go do this before you do a Honda Accord because, the savings and how long these things go. But I think that's a little optimistic in the fact that I still would rather you make sure, because I don't want you taking out those 72-month loan those loan terms, because I'd rather you focus on making you truly sure you can truly afford this car. And that's why when we do 23.8, we do 20% down. Don't finance it longer than 3 years. Make sure the payments don't exceed 8% of your income. And then realize that's with basic brands. A brand like Rivian, I want it 12 months, same as cash. And that's the part you're in. So as long as you've saved up enough cash that you can pay this vehicle off within 12 months, I think there's nothing wrong with buying that Rivian, especially if it's not causing you to neglect the other financial order of operations and the steps you've already built towards your savings and your investments.
Yeah, I get where Houston's coming from there. It's natural to feel a little guilty when you're considering buying a luxury car, but if you have all your ducks in a row, you're saving 35%. It sounds like you know what you're doing. If you can follow our rules, electric definitely isn't a bad choice, especially with gas prices the way they are now. I
think a lot of people, like when they hire a financial advisor, they think that we sit around and it's kind of like how Susie Orming used to have her show, and it cracked me up when people would call in and they'd ask, hey, can I go on vacation? And she'd go, no. And then, hey, can I do this? No. I mean, it was like I think the success of her show was generated off of everybody getting excited watching her basically swat out people's financial requests and goals and so forth. I think people would be shocked to find out us as financial advisors, we actually get one of my favorite things with my job is I get to give people permission to go actually enjoy your money. I mean, you've saved this money. You've done what you're supposed to. That's why we came up with the financial order of operations. If you respect the financial order of operations, do what you're supposed to. This is supposed to be a liberating tool that you can go spend your money guilt-free on things that you get enjoyment out of, instead of always feeling like, man, I don't know that I can spend that money because I feel really guilty about it. Use the financial order of operations to also be that liberation tool, not just the tool of saying no, no, no to everything that you want to do financially. And I think you'll have a better, happier relationship with every dollar that's entrusted to you. Guys, I'm your host, Brian Preston. Money Guy team, thank you, FTE Daniel. You rocked it. I think I was, not having Bo to my left, realizing that I'm doing a full monologue kind of on that intro versus having me and Bo bounce back. I'm a little rusty on that. I was a little out of kilt. So thanks, guys, for tuning in on a very special episode. Money Guy team, we'll be back.